What domains of AI have the most opportunity for the average individual over the course of the next 5 years?
Number one to me is education. I think that I did a video on my platform a while back on they call it Bloom's two sigma problem. Bloom was a educational psychologist in the 80s, and he was reviewing some of his PhD students' works and basically figured out that the students who receive one-on-one instruction, one-on-one tutoring, are two standard deviations above the average student as far as performance is concerned, which is beyond statistically significant. And that's why some people even say, they'll go on a limb and say, like, education is a solved problem. And it's been solved for decades. And yet, we still have, in America, obviously, a lot of people talk about how terrible the education is. And a lot of it, again, could be solved if we could just provide a tutor to every single student. Now, obviously, we don't have the resources to do that. With AI, I think we do. And I don't know necessarily whether it's going to be a general purpose, hey, this one AI is teaching you everything. But you asked, on a domain, I think that there's going to be so much low-hanging fruit, both as a business opportunity, but then also as a way for you to leverage AI into developing your career or whatever, of just leaning into the domain-specific education areas. And so it could be, we're in a very nice podcast studio right now. It could be audio technology and like learning how to edit, or video editing, or becoming really good at fishing. It doesn't matter what it is. I think that these are the type of areas where somebody previously may have to pay for a private lesson to get something that's really good, and now they can use a tool that hopefully will augment an additional, whether they have a teacher or not, but augment your traditional education with something where you can ask it all day long about, it doesn't get tired, it doesn't get annoyed with you, and you can have it teach you calculus in Fortnite terms, right? I don't think people realize just how big this is going to change education.
Did you see that recent viral tweet? That's my friend Kabir does brain rot education, which is teaching people, the basic, what's it called? The simple power rule in calculus.
Sure, yeah, where it turns into multiplication if you take.
Yeah, it's like 4x to the second becomes
Yeah.
8. The derivative
Yeah.
is 8x or 8 times x. Now, it's really interesting what you said about how anybody can learn significantly faster. Growing up, I was always trying to build different things, experiment with new technology, but I found that I constantly ran into these hurdles where I'm searching up this stuff online and I can't really find the correct solution because maybe it's a niche problem. And recently, I built an AI smart speaker, and the docs aren't that great online. I'm using like Arduino IDE and like writing in, I forget the language, but it's maybe like C++ or a language that I hadn't written much in before. But ChatGPT was able to guide me through step by step. And even if it didn't have the exact answer, it could push me in the right direction. To your point, like, we've known that the best way to educate is through personalized instruction. It's solved, but it's not widely implemented. And now AI will enable that. So I think that it's a great point. Like, education, AI will enable it for every individual. There's a lot of business opportunity to build within that, but also personal opportunity to, once again, use it to learn. What are some of the things that you're using AI to learn about, or that people should just use AI to learn about?
Yeah. I think that some of the most important things that I have learned recently are not actually super technical. I think that it's important to note that as AI and these tools get better and better, I was on stage with a bunch of people talking to college kids at GTC this past March, and most of the people on the panel were non-technical, and they were talking about how, all of a sudden they need to, here's how you can augment your technical abilities. And I realized that for the first time, I was sitting on the other side of it, because I'm telling all these people who are super technical, and I'm like, guys, you need to augment the other sides of it. And so, I think that becoming educated on even, this is going to sound, you got to bear with me here, but I think something that I've been learning a lot about is in sort of like world level problems, whether it's how literally does like a global logistics supply chain work. And I'm not saying that everybody has to learn that, but understanding, especially as we enter, I don't want to get political, but a world where I think a lot of people realize stuff is changing. I think understanding some history about how we got to where we are. I think understanding, how different governments function. I think understanding how universities, why did universities come about in the first place? Why is that system currently under strain so that, where is it going to go in the future? I do think that, for example, if I were a foreign nation that wanted to ruin another nation's chances, I probably would make it such that everybody stopped getting higher education altogether. Because then in one generation from now, we're gonna be so far ahead, it's probably not gonna be a problem. And so these types of things, that's more on like understanding on the global stage that I think as the AI, because AI, I think a lot of people are in two camps. One is like, this isn't a big deal. And the other one is like, this actually is a really big deal and you should pay attention. And usually the people who say it's actually a really big deal, you should pay attention, are the people who are the closest to the source. These are the people building these models and they're seeing where this is going. So they have a bit of a monetary incentive to also maybe build it up bigger than it is. But I don't think that this is a trend that's going to die in the next 2 years. And so I think that preparing yourself to enter what will feel like a very different world 5 years from now will be important. The other thing I just want to say is realistically, the most important thing that you can learn is just how to use these tools. It's the meta level, right? How do you interact with these tools? How do you use them in your day-to-day life? How do you get the most out of them for you? And that could be, Perplexity. It could be ChatGPT. It could be, the coding tools. It could be the low code, no code tools. It doesn't matter what it is. Learn how to use these AI tools and use them a little bit, ideally every day. I gave an example on a video where if the world changes 1% a day, 1%, which I would say AI probably on average is getting roughly 1% better a day, then 5 years from now, it's like 77 trillion times better than it was on day one. Like it's insurmountably large changes over that scale of time. But every day, you don't really feel the change that much. But if you wake up a year from now and you haven't touched it, you're going to be like, whoa, I don't know what's going on.
On the topic of higher education, I think that there is a very pervasive narrative on social media where people are like, why do I need to know, a squared plus b squared equals c squared? Like Pythagorean theorem isn't going to make me any money because, sure, the average person doesn't use it on a day-to-day basis. But in the development of a very holistic worldview, you're going to be able to identify opportunities and make the correct macro decisions in your own life. This is something that Eddie Zhu, who we've both spoken about, who's probably the smartest person that I know, 18 years old. But when I first spoke to him, he just kept using this word, and I really love it. It's the idea of macro decisions, and that the outcome of your life and being able to achieve the things that you want oftentimes is not just about how much effort you put in. Like, effort is table stakes, but choosing the correct orientation as a whole. And if you listen to the podcast of, I think Peter Thiel with Joe Rogan's a really good example. I saw a lot of commentary on it. People were like, wow, it is pretty wild the degree to which Peter Thiel's knowledge spans outside of the tech world, but into philosophy and economics and world politics and whatnot. And I certainly agree, and I think that it's an underrepresented take on social media, which is that you should develop your hard skills, but then layer in your knowledge of the world, and that's going to enable you to apply it directionally in the correct manner.
100%. I mean, a really small example would be something like, let's say, you want to become really rich and you want to have the hard skills so that you can build a business. Well, there's a lot of great philosophy of people from thousands of years ago that have more or less distilled certain things about leadership, about drive, about all of these things that will if you either you'll fall into traps that you didn't know were there, and maybe you learn things the hard way, or maybe you just keep banging your head against the wall. But if you had studied a philosopher from 3,000 years ago, then actually you would be equipped with the tools to develop and walk through the world as it is today. And that wasn't the thing that, as you read that book, it's not like how to make money 101. And yet that is now a tool in your toolbox. That's a phrase that I'll use a lot is you're adding tools in your toolbox. And the more well-equipped you are holistically actually will give you a higher chance of success in the small micro orientation that ends up being the one that hopefully will make you, for example, a lot of money. I know that's what a lot of young men optimize for.
I think it's a great perspective, which is like in this time where we have this rapidly developing technology and the whole world order is changing, you should obviously spend a lot of time studying that. And yet you should still study the things that have been important to study throughout the course of human history: philosophy, psychology, statistics, calculus, economics.
Yeah. I think that the base level stuff, especially in a world, like you said, that's rapidly changing, I think that one of the easiest ways to become disoriented is to not have the sort of base level understanding of how to kind of orient yourself, period. And so if you can have the basic stuff, if you know, for example, what you value as a person, what you value in friends, what makes a good leader versus not a good leader, those types of things, then even as the world changes, you can orient yourself and you'll be able to identify the unknowns. And then hopefully, again, this is where I think higher education is supposed to equip you with the tools to then go and basically discover more about the unknown. It's to give you the critical thinking skills. I use maybe 2% of what I did in university on my day-to-day as in my career. But I use the skills that I learned to learn new things that I learned in university. It's the meta skill. It's the learning how to learn every single day of my life. And that's what it gave me. The most valuable thing I got was, hey, I want to go learn about geopolitics. How would I do that? A lot of people can't answer that question. I'll tell them, hey, go learn how to code, go learn
They
how
have
to whatever.
no idea where to start.
No idea.
Yeah, I'm certainly a believer in, there are always a lot of good new books to read, but if you want to learn about these sort of foundational topics, there are classics. Like there are books that are 100 years old that are worth reading. For psychology, it may be Carl Jung. For economics, it may be Wealth of Nations, right? Do you believe that this sort of orientation and view towards knowledge is commonly held amongst people under the age of 25?
I mean, I would say that's a rhetorical question. No, I don't think so. I think that a lot of, and I don't blame specifically young men for being very utilitarian. I think that's something that is not, women have it too, but I think men really have it, where you said it earlier, like if I don't need A squared plus B squared equals C squared, then why would I learn it? And they feel like it's a waste of time. And so if it can be like, I am only going to try as if it's a fixed sum of the things that you learn, you can only learn so much, which there is some truth to that. But, if you're spending a lot of time brain rotting, then that's stuff that's time that could have been spent learning additional things that you chose not to.
Okay, real quick, I want to now flip this. Do you think that this view towards life is commonly held amongst people over the age of 30?
I think that the absence of it becomes true. And what I mean by that is that I think that people over 30 oftentimes will either make the mistakes and they'll say, what I wish I knew, or they'll actually just throw up their hands. They'll throw up the white towel and be like,
I made the wrong decision. I'm giving up.
It's done for me. Yeah, it's done for me, but this is how I wish I either lived, or I wish I put a focus on this.
Yeah. I think that you had somewhat of the same experience, but growing up in middle school and high school, I did feel that sense of like, there isn't a lot of utility in what I'm learning. And I'd always loved the act of learning, but school kind of pulled it out of me because I noticed the flaws in the systems. And I was like, okay, if this system has this set of flaws, and therefore it must be worthless in and of itself. And it's interesting as you get older and more mature, you kind of look back and you're like, well, maybe it actually was good that I was learning about history from that age. And maybe it wasn't presented to me in the proper manner. And I think that it's very exciting, the idea that, you know, AI and personalized education will enable children to further pursue the things that they feel an affinity towards, and yet also give them the baseline knowledge that they need to develop into a human with a grounded understanding of the world.
100%. There's actually a trope of basically, you know, for lack of a better term, narcissistic Silicon Valley men who are like, education's broken, I'm going to go fix it. To varying levels of success or non-success. That's up for other people to decide.
Well, listen, I think that I fall into the bucket of failed at that.
And but it is true, right? I do think that whatever, hopefully, education will change, as it always changes. But I think we're going to see a bigger change than we've seen in a long time with the advent of AI. And I don't know. You know, it could be a lot of people will talk about exploratory education. You know, it starts early. There was the advent of like Montessori schools, where that's the whole idea, is that young kids allow them to explore what's interesting to them. But I've heard of schools, and I am going to quote this, so I don't have the sources, but it's a school that basically is like, yeah, it's AI-driven, roughly, education. You don't go to school for 8 hours a day and have a bunch of homework on a bunch of nonsense. And apparently, the students at that school are performing quite well. It might be a
what's
hybrid.
it called?
I don't know the name of the
Alpha School?
It might be.
In Texas?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it might be.
I think it's Alpha School.
Yeah, and so maybe that's the model that works, or maybe we do need some kind of strict curriculum that is augmented. I don't know what it'll look like, but I am super excited. And unfortunately, you know, I think that because education is not as revered as far as a profession in the United States compared to some other places, the people who are, again, best served to solve this problem might not be the one who are motivated to solve it, or conversely, the people who are getting negatively affected by AI right now, you know, the teacher where all of her students or his students are cheating and turning in ChatGPT essays, they might just ban that. They might think AI as a whole is a net negative, and I don't blame them. Right, from their worldview, it's caused all of their students to not do work. And how does that teacher, you know, move into the world where this is something that hopefully can coexist?
I think it's in these highly oscillatory periods, you have the emergence of these different sort of beliefs towards these new technologies. It's inevitable that something that can be taken the wrong way on a grand scale will be taken the wrong way. I think you just have to hope that you see some sort of reversion to the mean or the truth, or what is good for society, which is an acceptance and embracing the new technology, figuring out how to use it to empower people. Which, to that point, you work at Nvidia. I believe Jensen Huang has said that we're moving towards a world where we will have 1 billion programmers. How do you kind of think about that topic? A world where people are able to build. What does that mean for software, as well as for how individuals orient themselves within that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly exciting for a number of reasons. As many people would say, and they would be patently wrong, that the world has enough software. I think that the world has an insatiable hunger for software. It
just takes in information and edits it, and edits our human experience and how we interact with the world. Like we talk. Sorry to interrupt, but
please.
We talk about the metaverse, right? Like that was obviously a very hot button topic in 2021. But man, like we already live in it. Every time you open up your phone, every time you look at that screen and go interact with somebody else or interact with a piece of single player technology, whatever it may be, like that is the metaverse, and we're all living in it.
Yeah, and that's just how you personally interact with it. That's not even including, you know, whether it's again, I'll go back to supply chains, or how things are getting to you, or in healthcare, or in the military. In this ever-changing world, I think that there's an insatiable hunger for software. And so if 1 billion people, which I do think we're on track to essentially everyone becoming a quote-unquote developer, then what excites me is that previously in the sort of legacy software world, there were people like me who were trained software engineers, and there's this long list of, essentially it's a game of telephone from the people who either are domain experts and they know what needs to be built, or it's a customer who has a demand for software, which is then, somebody who recognizes the demand, tries to build the product. Well, they recognize the business need. Then they have to basically communicate that, depending on how big an organization is, down a series of people, ends up at maybe a PM or something, which then goes to an engineer. And think about how bastardized the original idea was, all the way based onto the time where the trained software engineer is
From
actually
the
the one
person
building
who
it.
really knows what they need, all the way down the stack to the person who's building it, all the way back up, and you have to filter through. It's what's the game the Chinese Secret?
Yeah, well,
Where
or just the game Telephone, right? Where we all
telephone.
whisper.
Yeah, exactly. I think that they're referring to the same game.
Yep.
I was at a trivia night at a bar recently where we played it, and it's funny to see how it's like, few percent changes at each step just results in a completely bastardized version at the end where it's, you can't recognize it compared to the original idea.
Exactly. And so while we can talk about, I think that this is not as high stake or as impactful when we think about something like a consumer product, although I do think that there's a lot of value there. I think of the cancer researcher who's the only person in the world with the stuff in between their 2 ears, and they want to essentially, let's say, run a simulation. They've got an idea for a breakthrough, and previously they would, again, have to communicate that to somebody who knows how to write software. But now imagine that that person is able to do that on their own. And not because they know how to write software, but because they know an AI that knows how to write software, and it is good enough.
And the AI also has domain understanding of the models that the cancer researcher is trying to build. And whereas it may not be as good, it's able to, it decreases the amount of information loss on that forward pass to the software and then back to what the researcher interfaces with.
And that's why, so I think we're entering the world of what I'll refer to as the subject matter expert. I think that if you're somebody who is high agency and you're a subject matter expert, and I say that term, I don't mean that you're the best in the world at something, because as soon as I say that, I'll lose some people, and they'll be like, "Oh, but I'm just I'm a semi-pro skateboarder," and it's like that is enough. Like, talk about a domain, most people that have not applied software to it yet because there has not been enough demand to make that connection, but now there is.
I mean, this is honestly exactly what I did, which is, I think I was, I had taken a few computer science classes in school, but I couldn't build software myself. But this is like the very beginning of vibe coding where there wasn't Cursor, but ChatGPT got me just enough past the finish line. Like we were just talking about it earlier. I didn't even know how to commit to a Git repository. Like it was, all of my code was stored locally, but I was forward enough to the point where like AI just pushed me past that threshold, and then I was able to apply it to talking to girls. I was in a fraternity, and the other guys would be messaging girls, sending messages in the group chat, being like, what should I say to this girl? So I wasn't the domain expert, just like you're saying, but I had enough understanding, and I was at like enough of that intersection to be able to make it work. Same with looks maxing, same with calorie tracking.
And I want to comment on that because a lot of people will, you were early, but if you're watching this, you're still early.
So
right?
early.
The low-hanging fruit, some people will use the term like arbitrage, the value arbitrage that is still available today. It's hard for me to describe how big the pie is, and I don't think we will exhaust these things for many years.
If we look at the curve of like where the market should be, or where the state of, in this example, software should be, and where it currently is, I think that where it currently is growing, but where it should be is growing more rapidly as we see these advancements in the underlying models and the tools available to builders. So it's like this gap is just growing and growing and growing every single day.
And I don't know if we're ready to pivot the conversation, but that's just software. That's not even getting into the physical AI stuff.
Which I think is a good thing to turn to. Nvidia obviously exists below the layer of the foundational models. So the software that we're talking about, like, this is what I build. This is a lot of the stuff that people interact with. We sit at the application layer. Below that, we have the foundational models. We have the OpenAIs of the world, the Anthropics, Gemini, Grok. Below that, we have the chip designers, Nvidia. So how does Nvidia position itself, and being within the organization? Like, what are the sort of trends that you see beyond the fact that, okay, people are going to be able to program, but how will it manifest itself in the sort of devices that we interact with?
Yeah, I do think first of all, I'll say stuff that only can be said publicly, but I think that intelligence is going to be everywhere. One of my favorite thing that Jensen talks about publicly on stage is describing data centers as truly what they're becoming, which are AI factories. They're factories that are producing a new kind of intelligence. The unit is usually referred to as a token, right? These LLMs or any kind of transformer model will output tokens, could be image as well. And in the same way that, certain factories, if it's producing electricity, the output is electrons, we're now outputting tokens. And our sort of mission as a company is how do we proliferate intelligence as quickly and as much as possible. And so I think that we want to push intelligence to its limits at these data centers. But then additionally, some of the most fun things that I think will come out are what's commonly referred to as intelligence at the edge. It might be, some people joke and be like in your toaster, but that's an example of the edge, right? It's something that's not hooked up to either a data center or it's not powered by your PC. It could be, a robot would be like a humanoid robot would be intelligence at the edge. Or the really cool example was that we were yesterday with Joseph Nelson from RoboFlow, and they do computer vision stuff and talking about, so they had an item or like a computer vision model that would be on a train and tracks will get damaged. And it's a thing that's looking at the tracks below and very quickly can identify there's an infraction, and that's like literally keeping people safe, but also the logistics world safe and stuff like that. And that's intelligence at the edge. So those were 3 random ass examples, but imagine if everywhere you could apply intelligence.
Yeah. I think another term used here as well is like local inference, specifically when we refer to large language models. For anybody listening, inference is the step where you have the model itself and you can download that onto an SD card, for example, and then you run inference. So you can take in some tokens. Let's say I'm speaking. We'll use a microphone. We'll transcribe that into text. We'll run that through the LLM. That step will be the inference step, and then output the tokens and then return that to the user. Now, there are so many fascinating examples here. One that I like to think a lot about is the teddy bear. Children, the same way that when I was growing up, I had my little teddy bear where I'd press the button and it'd say something. But imagine having a teddy bear where you can converse back and forth, and it can build a memory on you as you get older. And it doesn't even have to do this externally. Say your parents are concerned about privacy. You can run local inference. You can embed a chip into this teddy bear, and you just have to plug it in and charge it, and it can build a context on you as you grow up. And then maybe you can download that memory, and as you get older, maybe this progresses into different tools. Maybe you have a watch, maybe a pendant, maybe your glasses, and you can continue to build this sort of second brain of yourself that understands you and helps you learn about the world and sort of mature. And, going back to it could be a personalized education, learning assistant. On the topic of physical sort of devices as well, I was talking to my brother about this. It's crazy because any individual now that's sufficiently intelligent, has a general understanding of computers, could theoretically build a drone where you have solar panels, you have a chip, you have some storage, you have some cameras, and it could fly across the world with no remote connection. You wouldn't even need a 5G, you wouldn't need to be connected to it at all. It could control itself and fly across the world in perpetuity. Now, obviously, that's not super applicable for the average person, but it's going to be really interesting to see how these peripherals enter our life.
100%. The teddy bear example is an interesting one, mainly because, again, I think where my mind went immediately is the skepticism that other people will have And not to say that a product like that couldn't exist, but I do wonder where's the inflection point where the people who are making those kind of decisions not necessarily die off, but the ideas die off such that we
Who are
now
making what decisions?
so I think that if you were to introduce that product to market right now, even my parents are very technically inclined, and when the DeepSeek model came out and it was open source, and I'm like, Dad, the weights live on your machine. It's not beaming back to China. It can't. It mathematically does not work. And this is somebody who's very intelligent, but he's like, I'm still skeptical. And
So I think, to be honest, on the teddy bear example here, you just hammer home, it's not connected to the internet. It's not connected to the internet. It's not connected to the internet. I think that this is largely like a rhetoric messaging problem to solve.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I do, the adoption. I think what's funny is even when ChatGPT, what you find that people who were diehard skeptics, 2 years ago, at some point may succumb for whatever reason. It may be by choice, or it may be literally. There are going to be people who adopt this stuff by necessity because it's like, well, you're going to lose your job if you can't have this anymore.
I experienced this recently myself in a slightly different sense. I lost my phone in an Uber on the way home from a trip. And I got home and I felt pretty good. And I was like, all right, I can get my work done on my laptop. I can communicate with people on my laptop. Let's see how long I can go. And I made it about, I think it was 3 days, to the point where not being able to Uber or two-factor authentication or like phone call and like all these things just started to pile up. And I was like, man, okay, I need to get a phone again. And as any sort of technology, in this case AI, LLMs, reach sufficient levels of adoption, you're kind of forced into using it. The alternative being like go completely like Ludditan or Amish-like and avoid it altogether. But you just won't be able to function in a society where everything is built around these products.
That's why, back to the adoption thing, and my one piece of advice to everybody is use them a little bit every day is we can debate about morality. We can debate about, its effects on the environments, which we were talking about on the way here. We can debate about all that stuff, but it's an inevitability. Like, I'm sorry, you can debate about it. You can have a more mental sparring, but there's no, okay, let's turn this thing off. Like, the ship has sailed. And so either you can surf the wave or it can crash into you. But there's no option here. I'm sorry. Like, I don't want to, oftentimes my advice is what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And for all the people who are like, I'm just going to wait for this thing to blow over, not going to happen. Mm-hmm. I would bet my life on it.
It's like saying, I'm never going to get on the internet. That thing is that's not for me.
And there were people who did that.
And, you can do it and you can try to, but you're just going to fall so far behind if you want to function akin to most people in society. If you want to find economic success, if you even want to maintain like your relationships and whatnot, it's going to be significantly harder in a world where, for the internet, it's like the new messaging medium becomes people just use the phones. And if you're not on the internet, like no one wants to send mail back and forth. And there are probably ways that this is going to manifest itself. With regards to AI.
I was talking with one of my friends earlier. I even find like I'm pretty adverse to email. I don't like email as a medium. You
I tell people text me. Yeah. I'm like, just shoot me a text.
100%. And yet that's a medium where still much of the world operates on. There will most certainly be a time where email more or less gets phased out because it is, it'll be like sending a fax. Like at some point it becomes a legacy way of communicating.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to switch gears here a little bit. But generally within the realm of orientation of life, I think within the startup and technology world as a whole, a lot of people view certain things as being a waste of time. For example, working out. How did you get into fitness? What's your relationship with it? Do you think that increases your productivity? And how do you stay on top of work, social life, and whatnot while still exercising almost every day?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, when we were discussing the most recent question, I watched Diary of a CEO with Simon Bartlett and Simon Sinek was his name. And they were discussing on the nature of AI, but particularly around things being hard. And that's actually why, certain things are valuable. And so when the AI can cut to the end of the journey, then there is some truth that you're missing. The benefit that you got is not because you got to the answer, but it's because, he gave the example of writing a book, and he's like, the book he's not better because the book exists with all of his ideas in it. He's better because he wrote it, and how painful that was. And I think that as we move towards a world with lower and lower friction, there are certain things that are inherently valuable because of not necessarily their difficulty, but because there's friction involved. And I think that weightlifting or just generally being active. I'll use being active. I personally like weightlifting.
I like to use the term movement.
Movement.
Right. If it's for some people, it's hiking. I think some component of resistance is important. Right. So not just running or hiking, but you should probably be doing some weights or push-ups or whatever. But general activity, movement.
Yeah. And so, and I agree. And biologically, that's also true. It increases your bone density, which even for women is even more important than men, but that's very important. I had tried every sport. And I was honestly I was not very confident. I would play like combat sports, or not even combat sports with contacts, things like basketball. And I would kind of get pushed around, and I didn't like that feeling, but I just thought, that's who I am. I'm kind of, I'm the nerdy guy and, good at math, but I'm not the guy who's going to, I don't know. And so I had a really great coach. I was 15 years old. And he was weightlifting. So if you didn't play a sport in my high school, then you had to either do something active, and one of the options was weightlifting. And he was a great guy. He was in his later 20s at the time and super jacked. And he basically was like, no, you remind me of me when I was a kid.
It's crazy as a teenager. You look at someone who's jacked and they say that, and you're like, what?
Yeah, no.
Wait, I could be like you?
And he was, like I said, he's basically probably similar age to what I am now. But in my head, he was like 45 right at the time. And just, yeah. So I looked up to this guy a lot. And I think that what a lot of people worry about at the beginning, which is completely normal, is insecurity in the gym. Do people think I look weird if I'm overweight? Are people making fun of me? All that stuff, which is obviously you need to get past that, and that's difficult. I can say that. But I also had the benefit that I was basically in a class where basically all the people who were next to me were in a similar boat, but also it wasn't a public gym. It was a gym at my school, and so I didn't have to go through that quote unquote embarrassment. And I fell in love. I fell in love for a number of reasons. It was the first time that I basically sought out to do something myself and stuck to it on a time frame basically longer than, I would say even a semester, because I would have classes for semesters, but I was forced to do that. This was my choice. And then, this is true for a lot of young men. I did it partially because I wanted to attract women. And truthfully, again, I'll tell you what you need to hear. People did treat me differently. And, it was 2 years, by the way, 2 years of lifting before I, really kind of looked different. But and I didn't do that. I could have gotten a girlfriend before. That's the thing. I wasn't a different person. But I was more confident now. And so I, got a girlfriend for the first time when I was a senior year of high school, and people treated me differently. And when I went to college, then I show up on campus and they're like, oh, this guy must have been jacked out the womb. And of course, 2 years ago, I was not even close to that man. So now I'm getting confirmed a new identity. And nowadays, I work out roughly 5 to 6 days a week. I work out 50 minutes. It's not that much. And it is as important to me as eating, sleeping, brushing my teeth before I go to bed.
I find that, I'm sure you experienced this early on. I find that with any of these sort of habits that people find difficult, the number one optimization that I make early on is I'm like, okay, how do we make this fun, enjoyable? And sometimes you can't do it. Sometimes you just have to stick it out. But I'll give maybe not the best representation of myself example, but whenever I'm hungover, I have made it into a routine that I go to the gym immediately. And I figured out how to make it into this enjoyable activity. I go on a run with my friend, we do sauna, cold plunge, whatever, and I know that I feel better afterwards. And this applies to weightlifting in general when you first get into it. I think it applies to a lot of things in life. It's first figure out how to make the the action enjoyable, because when it's enjoyable, you don't need a lot of discipline. You don't need to muster up this like insane amount of motivation to overcome the friction of not wanting to go. It's just part of who you are. You're like, I love doing this thing. So maybe that's going with a friend, maybe that's listening to good music, whatever it may be. Figure out that thing for yourself.
100%. I think it's important to note, though, that there will be days where you don't want to go, and you go anyways. That is what discipline is, right? Discipline is not. I think a lot of people are like, oh, that person, LeBron James just loves basketball, and it's like LeBron James probably loves basketball. There are days where he does not want to practice, and he practices harder and longer than anybody else because he's disciplined, not because it's innate to his bones that he loves doing it.
For sure. I think that making it fun is one of the easy ways to start building the habit, but the longer term, I think or very sustainable strategy for me is like, and I think that the idea of making it fun builds on this fundamental topic of decreasing friction. And so I like the example of like that we still have somewhat of lizard brains where you don't need to muster up this or create this insane image of like the hour and a half grueling workout that you're going to do. When you know that you should work out and you have the time to do it, just go put on your shoes and grab your key and walk to your car, right? And don't think about the workout. Just do the steps one at a time. Don't commit to saying, I'm going to complete this workout. Commit to putting on your shoes and then commit to grabbing your keys. And you don't have to build up this insane sort of, once again, this insane like mental fucking thing that you have to overcome, because then it's a hell of a lot easier to just say, fuck that. I'm going to go grab the chips and I'm going to sit on the TV. I'm going to play the video game.
100%. I mean, that's what, truthfully, I think when I talk about my successes in a number of different ways, and that's not to say that sounded like a vain sentence, but I attribute a lot of my success thus far to my relentless consistency. Period. End of story. Luck, of course, is involved. Maybe my brain is wired a certain way, whatever. But consistency. And, like I said, I work out 50 minutes. I'm not, dripping in sweat, tired for the rest of the day after my workouts. But I've done thousands of workouts at this point. And so when I've done thousands of workouts, the fact that I had, 6 really bad ones completely is masked over by the fact that I just went, and I went anyways.
I like the quote where it's like, every single year, even every single month, I go to the gym more times than I don't. And it applies to so much more than just the gym. I loved your tweet. I think it's your pinned and maybe most popular tweet, which is, I've gotten 1 B in my life. I had a 3.97 GPA in college. I was president of my fraternity. I had a social life, and I worked out 5 to 6 times a week. Ask me anything. And it is so insane to me that you still get hate for that. People you don't have a fucking wife and kids. And you're like, man, what a ridiculous sort of like victim mindset to constantly chalk up the fact that maybe you're unhappy with your life, and so therefore other people just don't deal with the same things as you.
Of course. And that's what, I'm not saying that you're me and therefore you should do exactly what I did. But yeah, I think that it's, truthfully, a lot of people, I saw one the other day where I was talking about sleep. It was a whole video dedicated on sleep. I prioritize sleep a lot. And somebody was like, oh, I just don't have the time. And I'm not one to clap back. But I went to his profile and, seems like a nice guy, but just based on his profile, I can tell he has the time. And I'm like, no, you can sleep 7 or 8 hours a day. I promise you. There are people who are a lot busier than you who do. And so it's a very easy defense mechanism of just like, nope, I can't, or nope, you can because you have this and I don't have that, whatever it is. And just learning that, what I say oftentimes is that the people who are doing the things you want to be doing are oftentimes, probably most of the time, doing the things that you don't want to do.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, I think one of the major factors for people like lacking the discipline or whatever it may be, the ability to accomplish the things that they want, is the overcomplication of trying to optimize across all these different dimensions. They're trying to optimize their career while also exercise and social life and nutrition and it all just becomes so overwhelming that they don't do anything at all. And I feel like this has been one of the major messages that you push on social media, even just over the course of the past couple days of me being here. It's crazy how, we had a little get together with some people that we know in SF, and people are coming up to you, and they're like, Bax, like the Jack Tech guy. How do you think about the sort of your future in social media? Is this something that you still want to do 10 years from now? Is it something that you're like, okay, this is going to lead to this sort of career growth for me? Did you get started out of passion? Like, how do you
I
think about all of it?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think a lot of where it started from was I was also in a fraternity, and a lot of the younger guys. I mean, I came to college not knowing a whole lot about what I wanted to do. I still wasn't very confident, and I was a good student. That was about it. And I grew a lot. The fraternity was great for me. I know that people will have some preconceived notions, and there are definitely negatives to fraternities, some more than others. But I had guys I could look up to. I had guys who were charismatic, and I wasn't, and I wanted to learn how they were charismatic. I had guys who were getting cracked internships. I had guys who, had girls who, of course, I wanted to date, and I'm like, well, I don't know how to do that, and I got to learn that. And then towards the end of my career or my journey at Georgia Tech, the younger guys would come and ask me for advice. Non-coincidentally, it's the advice that I started giving on social media. It was, how did my resume sucks? Help me. It was, how do I prepare for this interview? This girl's, not texting me back. What do I do? Right? All of those kind of things. And then when I moved out to San Francisco, I missed that because obviously I'm not physically with them anymore. And so I was like, well, I'll try this whole social media thing, and it took off relatively quickly. And now it's turned into something so much bigger than I obviously ever thought on day one. But now I really do think that this is a part of me. It's something that I was meant to do, and I would love to. I don't think it'll be on TikTok forever, right? I don't expect myself to be 40 making the same videos I do now, but some semblance of that. I look at people like Professor Scott Galloway, and he writes books. He has a podcast, and different mediums that I think would be. That's why I've gotten a bit more into writing, even if it's short things on LinkedIn and Twitter. I know that that's a medium that is powerful, especially as I grow older. And I would say that the problem, I think, unfortunately, the problems for young men are still getting worse. I don't see the stats of anything improving. And so I would love to sort of dedicate a lot of my time, energy, and hopefully money towards having an impact on that problem. And my social media will be a medium or a vessel to hopefully do that. And before that, hopefully also personally I'll benefit in my career and otherwise. I already have.
You had a great quote earlier, which was like, the thoughts and things that go on in your brain are often very obvious and things that you take for granted, but can be extremely helpful to others. And I think something that you and Lucas, who we both know, Lucas Pachter, have in common is I actually watched both of y'all's videos like before I had any success, which was really funny. Partially for entertainment, partially learning. Like there were things that I learned about the tech world from videos that you created. But that these sort of things that we take for granted, for Lucas being in a fraternity and sharing, what his experience was like, for you entering into the tech world, are actually a black box to a lot of people. And all they hear are kind of rumors on the grapevine or like, thoughts from other people, but they don't have that firsthand experience. And be able to provide that to people that don't really have that firsthand perspective or the experience themselves, I think is invaluable in so many ways.
I mean, that's why I think that there's just so much value in it. A lot of people will come up to me and they'll be like, I'm thinking about doing social media, but I don't know what I would talk about, or they don't feel qualified to speak on any subject. I have one individual who comes up, I've told this story before, but he's like, yeah, I want to start posting basically similar stuff to what I did. But, like I just got a job as a software engineer at JP Morgan Chase, And
I have friends that are doing like crazier shit and they're not posting, and I don't want to
exactly.
be the fucking,
Exactly, but but also like you helped me a lot because my dad wasn't in my life, and I didn't go to a school where I had like a college guidance counselor, so I had no idea what I was doing. And also, I'm like, dude, you just told me your story. What do you mean? Like, your story is way more actually relatable, coming from a position of becoming a software engineer from a disadvantaged position than mine is. And so, like, how did you figure that out? Like, how did you figure that on your own? Who were you watching? All that stuff. And I'm like, there's so much value in that, in just sharing your experience, that eyewitness experience, which is why, this is why advertising has gotten so different as well. But when you think about short form and these sort of algorithmic style content, and YouTube, I think, is the same now as well. TV, why were certain sitcoms and stuff? They're funny, but they feel kind of like monotonized because they're trying to appeal to as many eyeballs as possible because they can't control who's on the other side of the screen. Well, with algorithmic stuff, if you start watching, sweet like software engineering tech content, you'll probably land on my page because they think that that's who you want to talk to. And by the way, me on the other side, that's who I think I'm talking to. And so you can talk to people like an individual, which is also why I think, my style or the raw style content is kind of breaking through the noise, is because, yeah, it really is like I'm talking to you on the other side of the screen, not just trying to hope that it lands on somebody's eyeballs in the millions of people that are on the other side of that television screen.
Like, I feel like in the early days of anything, everybody feels that sense of imposter syndrome unless you're like a complete sociopath. Whether it be starting a business, creating content, going to the gym, like any act of trying to improve yourself is essentially acknowledging I am either not where I currently want to be, or like I think that this thing would be good for me because it'll push me further, which can signal to feel, or at least feel like it's signaling to others that you're like not super high status, and that you're trying to build this startup, but like he's not already successful, and like, oh, it's not gonna fucking work out, or he's making this content and dude, I have a better job than him, and like all these thoughts start creeping in. But I really like the phrase that you and Natter use, like he's one of us, which is there are people in the world that are willing to accept that and willing to put themselves in a position of relative inferiority or lower their status temporarily because they know that it will produce outsized returns in the long term. Oftentimes, it's not to increase your status or to prove something to other people, but because that it'll give you access to things that you previously didn't have access to. Capital, a healthy body, social capital or influence to nudge the world in the direction that you want to see it go.
It's like the Cluely kid, right? Earlier today, it was the new CMO of Cluely, Daniel. And he's like, yeah, it's like crazy. I've been watching your stuff for a while, and I just didn't think I'd like meet you in person or something. I'm like, dude, we're in the same circles now. What do you mean? Like,
dude, we pulled up to Cluely, and we're like, man, we're like massive fans of you guys, and they're like, what? You guys are fans of us? We're like, yeah, dude, you guys are doing cool shit. And just using them as an example, but anybody who starts doing something that's a little bit out of the ordinary experiences, you have this like insane array of emotions, and you have different people that are levying different sort of attacks and support to you, whatever. But more often than not, in my experience, anytime I do something that's out of the box, the people that I look up to are like, hell yeah, man, I fucking love that. Keep pushing it. Now, this doesn't apply to doing things that are like extremely immoral or fucked up, whatever. But putting yourself out there in any sense, building a business, going to the gym, creating content, whatever it may be. It just, it always upsets me that there are people that lack the confidence to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's just self-preservation at work or what it is, right? I actually was a podcast or somebody, it was Lucas, but it was Pachter, and he was talking, and he's like, I liked the image, but he said, if somebody gets up on a table and starts like shouting, he's like, riling people up, then a bunch of people are going to be like, that guy's weird, but then there's going to be some kid or people in the audience who are like, he has the balls to do that. Like, that's actually kind of cool. I like that guy. And there is that kind of, again, that's an imagery that I really like where, yeah, you probably aren't going to appease everyone, and it might suck sometimes, but you also won't die. I think like a lot of people, that phrase, I'll tell people all the time where it's like, yeah, you go ask the girl out and she rejects you and it hurts. Like I'm not going to say, oh, don't feel sorry for yourself. No, that sucks. But then you wake up the next morning and it's like you didn't die, then as long as you remind yourself, actually, this don't do things, by the way, where that is a risk. If the risk is I might die,
Yeah,
then
probably
maybe
avoid that.
probably avoid
activity.
that. But that's going to be 99.99999% of the time not the case. And so oftentimes taking the risk, and also, there's still things that are bad, getting excommunicated by like your family or parents. You don't want to do that
Harming
stuff.
other
right?
people.
Yeah, but I know people know we're not talking about that. Most of the time, the risk that you are holding back on, it's because you're self-preserving yourself from some outcome that to you feels like death, but in reality is really far from it.
Yeah, I think it's funny. We talk a lot about like the positives, the negatives of social media. I think that one of the negatives is that it makes people hypersensitive to the opinions of others. But a framework that I really like, in line with the example you were giving of Lucas, is that when you do things that are true to your own nature, sure, like people aren't going to like it. Not everyone's going to love you. That's life. But you're going to attract the people that you do want in your life. Whereas if you don't take any action at all, you're going to kind of just ambivalently continue to drift throughout, and you're not going to follow the path that I think that every individual has set out for them. You're not going to follow your soul. You're not going to follow your dreams. And so I'm a big believer in like, if you feel a calling to something, like take the fucking risk. It's a super simple book. It's like 140 pages, but it's why The Alchemist is my favorite book of all time. I read it pretty much every single year to reinstill that message into me, which is that you do things that are, you stand up on the table, you make the announcement, you put yourself out there. Sometimes it won't work out, but the times that it does, it's just leading you that much closer to where you as an individual should end up.
100%. I think, most of the people who are watching this would also be young. And as much as I'll oftentimes say, life is long, actually. It's not short, but it goes by quickly. And truthfully, the amounts of risks that you can take at certain levels, it does change over time. And so if there is a time to take risks, ones where, again, are non-life threatening, then I do think like while you're young, it's never going to get easier. It's never going to be a better time. And so, yeah, I would definitely say take some risks, put yourself out there.
Hell yeah. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. Actually, one final question here. We'll go with the most classic tech question possible. The Telian, what is your most contrarian belief?
On the topic of AI, I think that we probably will stumble across consciousness. I don't think it'll be human consciousness, but I don't think that's important. I think that human consciousness is special. It's some flavor of something that's magical in the universe, and I'm not a woo-woo person. But I think that it won't be LLMs, but at some point we will build some system that it may not follow all of what we call conscious, but it will trip a consciousness barrier. And I don't know if we'll know when it happens, but when we will, I think that's when the next era of civilization kind of begins, and it might even be such that we're pretty fragile, mortal sacks of meat and blood. I don't know if this is what's going to become interplanetary. It might be whatever that thing is.
I like it. That's a good one. Fuck yeah, brother.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining.